Hello everyone, it's Simon here with a review of Tiny Metal Full Metal Rumble. This game is available on PC as you see on your screens, but also on Nintendo Switch. I bought the original back on 2017 on PlayStation 4, but I've not received any word that it's coming to PS4 nor Xbox One. I think it should do though, because there's a bit of a niche to be had. Thank you so much for the developer for sending across a copy for review. That's always really kind and I appreciate it. It doesn't sway my judgment, but I'm always upfront and honest when someone does send me something through for free to review. Now, I've not played the Advanced War games, so whenever I see a review that goes, oh, it's just like Advanced Wars, well, rejoice, world, I have no comparison for that, so I'm going to be a bit thick. But I think this will be quite handy for people that maybe haven't played a tactics game properly before, because I'll be explaining stuff right the way from basics through to detail. This is going to be a long review. I've got a glass of cola with me. These reviews are always done in one take, so this could be a mess. Wish me luck. So, how does Tiny Metal Full Metal Rumble work? You're essentially playing as a selection of troops dropped into a map, and the map is done in a square grid, essentially. So you can only move up, down, left or right with each of the troops that you've got. You can't go diagonally, there's no hexagons, so when you're thinking of like those types of games, don't worry, it's only squares. Now, across these maps are a variety of different types of buildings, and your idea is for your troops to go along and capture these buildings or territories, because each time you capture one and it turns into your colour, it generates cash. Cash then means that on some of the buildings, like the factories, you can then generate new troops each turn to then basically go and pummel your enemy and take over their HQ. Every team has a HQ, or like a home base, and essentially the vast majority of the games in Tiny Metal, if you're able to take over the enemy base, then all of the rest of the troops drop down dead and you win. However, the same can be said for you, so you need to be able to be guarding your base as well as going for the attack as well. So there's always like that yin-yang, what shall I do, plenty of tactics to be had. There's other types of buildings as you go through the game as well. So you've got a helipad which generates helicopters and choppers, and they only appear on some of the maps, just depends on which type of map you go for. The factories, I've said before, generate new troops for you. Cities are very helpful because when you land on top of them and you take them over, you can then regenerate your own health and also pick up ammo. Ammo is the big new feature, essentially, in Tiny Metal Full Metal Rumble in terms of tactics and gameplay. So, in the previous game, you could kind of go round and just shoot as much as you want and you never ran out of ammo. Now, you have specific troops dedicated to following around your other troops to refill ammo as you go. So not only does each troop have HP and health, but it now has ammo that it needs to be refilled, and also each troop has like a set radius that it can go around, and that's dependent on the type of troop that you have. Now there's a variety of different troops, and they generally go between ground troops and air troops. The air troops are really simple. You've got a fighter pilot jet that can go around and is very effective against choppers and some of the ground troops, but it can't really hit a lot of the infantry stuff, like the single people stuff, very well because they're too small and it just can't deal with it. The choppers themselves can't hit the fighter pilots, but the choppers are very good at being in the air and hitting ground troops when ground troops can't hit air troops. However, both of the air troops are very susceptible to anything that comes with a missile, and there's several types of missile units on the ground that are big trucks that you can manoeuvre around. The problem with the missiles are that they can only hit in a ring radius around them, essentially. So if they've got anything close up, they can't defend for themselves. So they're very easy if you get someone to sneak in from behind to kind of take them down. So you have to be very tactical and use them with pinpoint precision, or build them in a way that they cover a really good area, which means that you're going to be able to get rid of anyone trying to like take an attack towards your missile trucks. Your infantry troops are very much around capturing territories. So your riflemen are very, very good at that. You've got special ops, which are kind of like a very, very beefy rifle person, but they can't capture territory nearly as well. So you've kind of got that dichotomy of what you need as to what you're going to issue. You've also got different types of tanks. The bigger the tank, the slower they go, but the more beefy they are. So if you've got like factories that are developing troops that are way out from where the action is, you need to be really mindful that if you're going to send beefy tanks that way, you're going to take a while to get into the thick of the action. And if you're struggling already, you might actually be too slow to get there in time. However, all of the tanks are quickly overcome, not just by missile people, troops, but also by I'm going to call them the mortar people, but that's not their actual name. But there's a troop for $300 or Monopoly money, whatever it is, that runs around. That's also got a very slow run, but they essentially can launch a single missile themselves, both to take out air choppers and copters and planes, but they're very, very good for taking out tanks, essentially. And then the last kind of section is the that I find useful anyway, are the scouts. And these are really, really fast, almost like minis that run around with gun turrets on, and they're fantastic for sorting out long distances so that you can scout up ahead, see what's coming, but they can actually get rid of quite a lot of infantry troops as well. Their issue is that they're really, really weak against tanks. So as you can see, everyone's got their positive, everyone's got their negative. You've also got snipers as well, which can kind of sit in the trees and get away with shooting people from afar. And your geography around the map is also very important. So sometimes, like infantry can climb hills, but tanks can't. However, they can go much faster if they're on a road compared to if they're in the snow or the sand, in the desert or something like that. Planes are the only ones that can go across water, obviously. However, they will run out of fuel very quickly, so you'll need a supply plane to go behind, filling them up not just with missiles, but with fuel. So there's all kinds of different things to think of. Essentially, as the game progresses, you start to change your tactics from trying to gather as much territory as possible to therefore generate cash, to then starting to either make concerted efforts to take out a specific team or to take us on a specific area of the map so that you can kind of make it like your second home from home. The game itself, when you're playing in a battle, when you actually then get to actually like attack each other, because I've only been talking about movements and kind of what's good and what's bad, and it tells you all of this when you're in a menus, by the way, so you don't need to remember any of this stuff. It's all kind of color coded as to what works well and what doesn't work well against each other. You don't just do like specific attacks on each other like face to face. You can obviously go round behind someone and that will cause more damage to them. You can also tag team up as well for something called focused fire, and what that means is that you can have someone on the left hand side, someone on the right hand side, or if you're really, really good, you can have one on all 4 points around a specific unit, and then you basically, a bit like in RPGs when you get like a stagger, it's like that, and you get bonus damage for being able to chain lots and lots of fire together. You just need to make sure that everyone can get to the right slot at the right time, because once someone's in focused fire, they're paused, they're ready to go, and they can't do another move until they've then done that fire. So you don't want to like trigger the gun too early, so to speak. The other thing that you can do, which doesn't happen nearly as often but is really handy to have, is the assault move. And what that is it's basically around trying to push someone off a tile, but you take damage as a result, and it's a bit like a last resort shove. If someone's about to take over one of your buildings or a building that's neutral, or even your HQ, push them off. you might take damage there and then, but it keeps you in the game essentially. So it's a really, really good like last resort tactic to have. The other stuff that you can do, just whilst I'm thinking of geography, is that if you're higher up, then you can deal more damage and take. You've got better defensive, so you take less damage. If you're in the trees, then that's really helpful for taking less damage as well. And quite often, if you're up on top of a city or on top of a hill, that then gives you a bit more of a vantage point as well in terms of the fog of war and what's going on around you. One of the things that the developer has quite interestingly said in the Steam forums is that whilst you, the player, has the fog of war and you can't see what's going on around you, the AI don't have fog of war and they can see exactly where you are. One of the criticisms that came from Tiny Metal, the original, was that the AI kind of fell into certain patterns and was quite easy to overcome. Not for me, perhaps. I spent far too many times trying to get past that final bloody mission, especially because it takes about 2 hours to complete. And when you die right at the end, I was not best pleased. The gameplay is still just as time-consuming, but with the AI, they're much more sharper and on the ball in general. There's only been one kind of thing that I kind of get a little bit annoyed at, and that is occasionally they'll start spawning a certain troop that is basically like a missile attack that only attacks air troops, and they'll spawn them on maps that don't have any helipads on, so you can't physically get any air troops in the action. And I kind of think, well, that surely the AI should be capable of not knowing that. So that's kind of the only negative that I have on the AI itself. But in general, it seems much more balanced, much more aggressive compared to before, but also a bit more tactical. Specifically when you're playing with multiple AI against each other. So in skirmish mode, quite often the most fun that I've had with Tiny Metal is where you've got a really small map and you've got 4 teams going up against each other, because within a couple of moves you're all on top of each other, so you don't have time to build up your army. So there's a bit of skill, there's a bit of luck, because if 2 of you go towards one specific competitor, then you might be the one that's left out and you can grow slightly and be a bit more prepared. However, you could also be the one that everyone goes for accidentally, and then you're really up against it. So it's fascinating to see. But what they do is the AI clearly prioritise getting territories. So if they start to see someone encroaching on their space, they will go nuts for you, because they know that the cash that gets generated from cities is the lifeblood of being able to keep themselves in the game, and that's something they didn't really deal with before. The one thing I will say about Tiny Metal is that when you get into the end game of something, say if you're turning the tide and you have got a real clear advantage, quite often you might have 20-30 troops on the map, and you need to do a move for each and every one of them to kind of progress through. One of the weirdest things that I found about the game is that on each of the factories on the menu, and it's carried over from the previous game, is that you can not build anything and skip the turn, but that menu option doesn't actually work, and so what you have to do is click on an empty tile and then go through the start menu and do end turn when you're finished. It feels really clunky. It took me ages to work out that you could do that. Which was a shame, because I was basically having to spend money every single round that I didn't want to spend, and that didn't feel like I was being tactical at all, and I was being forced into an issue. So if you are playing this game, they've apparently said that they were overruled by their publisher in the Steam forums. It said that they had to do something this way instead of that way, but yeah, they need to tidy up the menus if that's the case, and hopefully that will come in a later patch to sort that out. Other things that are kind of a bit wonky, and apologies, this has been a bit of a negative section. I didn't particularly find the story that interesting. It's just a means from going from one mission to another. They've brought in a nice overworld map, but it's just a bit of slick paint on essentially a menu. You can fly and drive around the world map and collect coins and music and maps that you can then buy with the cash that you win by playing the game itself in the store, and that's very, very handy. One of the things that has been taken away from the previous game is the ability to steal up your defences, and I think that is an interesting choice because it does mean that you are automatically drawn to being more aggressive from the outset. That doesn't seem to make the games any quicker though, but what you can do in all the gameplay that you see on here, I've turned down the battles into short animations. You've got longer form animations, which is where it drops into the game and you see like a back and forth, almost like if you've ever played the Risk games digitally, where they kind of fire back and forth and like the dice rolls. It's all very nice for the first times that you play it, and then you just want to play the game, so you automatically skip from like the long animations to the short ones. Occasionally I'll go back to the nice long animations if I think it's going to be a short game, but quite often I don't have the time for it and I just want to speed through, and that's kind of exasperated when you've got a really busy map. One of the other interesting things around the fog of war side of stuff is that you can kind of vaguely tell where all of the enemies are, because when it's going around the AI's turn, the camera shoots to where something is moving and taking over. So you kind of still get a bit of a picture of where people are, but you still don't have like the overall picture of everything. I don't know if I decide if that's cheating or not, that they can see through the fog of war and I can't. I've not really found it a particular challenge because that camera pans around and kind of negates the thing, so I feel like I still kind of know what's going on anyway. I shall leave it to later on in my own judgment for that one, as to whether or not I think that's a good idea or a bad idea. Outside of games where you need to kill off the other team's HQ, there are a couple of other modes that you've got as well. There are some game modes where you've got a commander, and it's like a beefed up version of a certain troop that you've got, and you need to basically keep your commander alive or kill the opponent's commander to take over and win. That, when you're playing through story mode, then essentially unlocks a new character for you to play with, essentially. And you can also get to communication posts on some of the maps, and that will then drop in like special commanders for you, which are like zooped up versions of certain troops as well. And they kind of level up the more that you play them, which is quite interesting. I don't often find them massively useful, but what they are really good for is that when you get to the communications post and you want to drop one of these beefy boys in, so long as you've cleared the fog of war on a piece of the map, you can drop them in anywhere. So you can be really, really tactical about where you want to go. If you want to drop someone on top of something to either capture a territory or a building or guard something specifically that you may have forgotten and left behind and now is vulnerable. The other thing that's new for Tiny Wars that I forgot to mention earlier on is a new type of troop, and that's called Mechs. The people who kind of were at the forefront of the first story aren't really at the forefront of the second one. They're still about though. But essentially, Mechs are like beefy infantry. And there's 3 different types. You've got one that can kind of do your general shooting and so on and so forth. Then there's like a beefed up version of that, which... a bit like the tanks, where you've got like one that can go faster and one that goes slower but is more powerful. They're very similar to the tanks, to be fair. But the third one's quite interesting because it's a walking missile thrower. So what you can do is you can use them to walk around slightly further than what you can do with your missile trucks as well. So yeah, the mechs are expensive, but they're quite beefy and they've got quite a lot of HP. So I find them quite useful to bring out later on in a skirmish, essentially. The other thing that's quite interesting as well, that's new to this sequel, is that in some maps there's abandoned vehicles as well that are completely neutral. So quite often it's quite handy to get some riflemen out, and they can commandeer some of these tanks, and it's almost like they've just been upgraded, and I really quite like that. And it's handy to know the maps that you're going around, because then you'll get to know where some of these abandoned tanks are. The other really good thing about that is that essentially you take over the tank's HP. So long as that tank hasn't been hit, you're going to go back up to 100 again. So you can use it tactfully or tactically, so that if you've got some injured troops and you want them to live on, get them to dive into the tank, they magically recover back to 100 HP again, and now they're a tank. So it's a bit like an evolution. I choose you, Pikachu. The other thing that's quite handy as well is that new to this game, as long with the healing and supplies that the cities do, you can also merge damaged troops together. It counts as both of theirs turn, but if, say, you've got a couple of troops that are at 50% each, you can combine them together to make it 100% troop. And what's really good about that is, say if you've got two 50% riflemen, what you can then do is use that becomes a 100% rifleman that can then go and make double points on capturing a territory, for example. The very last thing that I want to talk about, because I really appreciate that this review is... Oh my god, it's gone for 20 minutes. Okay, I've just looked. Sorry. Is... I knew this would be a long one. The last thing I wanted to talk about is that each character that you take over, whilst they're utterly bland in story mode, do have 2 different power-ups that you can unlock as you go along. And these are really, really key, and you find them on the menu options themselves. So when you're going through and choosing your characters, some of them you can do it at the start of a turn, essentially, and like one of them will boost the defences and the attacks of all the mechs. One of them will boost all of the infantry. One of them lets you then build troops for like 30 and 50% less. Some of them are specifically Air Force focused. But each character has its own unique kind of like super skill, and they can be really, really handy. So the main lady from Blue Fangs, who I've played with the most, and who you'll be seeing a lot of the gameplay here, she's got one that essentially doubles the rate of capturing a territory. So if you have got a couple of riflemen that are already at 100% health and they're both next to, say, a couple of buildings, trigger the ultra attack, then get them both onto the buildings, and you've captured 2 buildings that give you 200 money and gives you a good boost from out of nowhere. And they can be really, really handy for turning the tide on something, particularly if you've got a lot and you've played to the strength of that specific character. So that is Tiny Metal Full Metal Rumble. I hope that was informative. I feel like I've rambled a lot. If you've got any questions, please do leave them in the comments below. I have to say, the AI being so much more better, the selection of maps is better this time round. The expansion of troops is interesting. The fact that it's a bit more aggressive as opposed to being defensive and then going for a rush is quite interesting as a turn of phrase as well. The soundtrack is quite cool as well, I must add. Yeah, there's a lot to like here for Tiny Metal Full Metal Rumble. If there was some way to kind of have a surrender button for some people so that you could kind of auto play out a win when you're so close to winning but you've got like 30 million troops to go for, and a few little tidy ups of the menus would grow a great deal to make this a real must have for people that want to get tactical. Shame that they couldn't do a remove the fog of war local multiplayer mode. I think that would go down really, really well as well, because online doesn't seem to be particularly popular at the moment. So, thank you very much for watching. You guys will take care. Bye for now. This channel is just one of my many projects that cover games, music and film. If you enjoy any of these and would consider supporting me to develop further in the future, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Satorimon. Thank you for your time and for watching the video.